All right, lords and ladies. Today we're going to do section 4 notes. We're also going to talk about how to stay caught up with the class at the end of the video. So stay tuned to the end of the video so I can show you what we're doing for the next 3 days, and then you'll be relatively caught up. We'll go over more stuff next week. Next week we're going to be testing, so that gets a little complicated. But let's talk about the end of chapter 5. When we last left off, the battles of Lexington and Concord had happened, and the word battle is important there. We were openly fighting the British, so we're at war. The British don't think of it as a war. The British think of it as a rebellion, and the people who are leading it are not patriots, they are traitors. They are a traitor to the crown, but we are now fighting. We've killed British soldiers. British soldiers have killed us. It is wartime. So we're going to have a few more battles before we declare independence from Great Britain. We're not officially a country yet, but we're acting like one, and Great Britain is treating us like a country in rebellion. So after the battles of Lexington and Concord, the Congress meets again. Remember the first time they met? It was called the First Continental Congress. Convenient. And all they did is kind of like agree to write some drafts of papers. They didn't really do much. The second time they met in Philadelphia because it's in between all the colonies. And Boston would have been the natural pick, but Boston has all the soldiers in it from Great Britain because of the Intolerable Acts, and they shut down the port. So you don't want to meet and talk about overthrowing Great Britain where all the British people are. So they meet in Philadelphia, and they make two key decisions. If we're going to go to war, we're obviously going to need an army. So they create an army. Armies are expensive. See, militia is free. Militia is a dude who's a farmer, grabbing his own gun, grabbing his own ammo, putting on his own clothes, and going out and fighting. Militias are free. Armies are expensive. You have to provide everything for them, including their own food. And you have to pay them a wage. I mean, they're walking off their farm. The farm is how they supported their family. They're leaving their shop. That's how they made their money. They're walking away from that money. You have to pay them. Well, we didn't have any money. Certainly the British are not going to give us money to pay our own soldiers. So we got to create our own money. And we're going to print that money. We're going to pay our soldiers. Interesting thing about that, money only works if people want it. The only reason I can buy a Snickers bar is because the guy at the shop wants my dollar. Well, if you're printing money nobody wants, like we were, then it's useless. So we were paying our soldiers with useless money. Very few people would take it. Even Americans who believed in the cause needed to be able to turn that money around and buy something with it. And if it was British goods, they couldn't buy it. So we were printing useless money and paying our soldiers with it. This is going to create all kinds of problems. So now our country is divided into three groups. We're going to have those who supported the revolution, and they're going to be called patriots. And they are a minority in America. We assume, historically speaking, that the Americans were fired up and ready to fight the British. They weren't. Less than 30% of Americans were patriots. Those who wanted to stay with Great Britain, those who were loyal British citizens, don't forget, were British. The loyal British citizens who said, you know, I don't want to join the revolution. I think the revolution's wrong. I'm part of Great Britain. They were called loyalists. And then the most people, over 40% of Americans, didn't identify as either. They just wanted to stay out of this whole darn thing. They didn't care who won. I just want to get up in the morning. I want to go to work, and I want to come home and take care of my family, go to sleep. I don't care what you call me. I don't care what my label is. I don't care who I belong to. I just want to live my life. Okay? That was actually the majority, not the majority, but the most Americans. If you want to know who the minority groups sided with, African Americans joined Great Britain's, supported the Great British effort. There were certainly African Americans that did die in the American Revolution on our side, but most of them supported the British because A, the Americans weren't great to them. They enslaved them. B, Great Britain had gotten rid of slavery at this point. Slavery was outlawed in most countries in Europe by 1776. America was late to that party. So African Americans supported the British. Native Americans, who hated the British, hated the colonists even more. Remember, the colonists were slaughtering them wholesale out west, and the British government tried to protect them with the Proclamation of 1763, tried to keep the settlers from coming out west. So the Native Americans who hated the British when the French were around now have to side with the British because they're the lesser of the two evils, because the colonists are terrible for the Native Americans. So the minority groups both side with the British. So Continental Congress creates an army, creates money to pay them, and then decides to take one last chance at peace. They send the king what's called the olive branch petition. The olive branch has always been historically a signal of peace in ancient Rome, where lots of olives grow. When Rome became peaceful with a country, or when a war was over, they would exchange olive branches. They'd make a big show of bringing an olive branch and handing it over, saying, we are now at peace. So we sent the olive branch petition to the king. A couple problems with that. First off, we're in open rebellion. We're creating an army. We're shooting the king and Parliament's soldiers. He's not really interested in listening to us say how much we want peace. Secondly, he's the king. You don't get to talk with the king, and you certainly don't get to make demands of the king. And that's what the olive branch petition was. It was saying, look, leave us alone, give us some say in our taxes, remove your armies, and we won't go to war. Well, we're incredibly weak. That's kind of like a second grader telling a senior in high school, hey, knock it off and I won't punch you. Well, I don't care if you try to punch me. You're not going to actually succeed. So the king wasn't afraid of us, and you don't get to make demands of a king. I don't get to make demands of a king. A British citizen today can't even tell the queen what to do. You can't walk up to the British queen and say, drop and give me 20. The British king didn't even pay attention. He literally told the guy, the servant, that said, you know, your majesty, we have a message from the colonies. The king told them to throw it out, and they literally threw it in the fire. So he didn't even listen. So obviously, no peace. We're going to have to go to war. So while we're figuring this out, while the Congress is meeting, while we're doing all this, we have a bunch of colonists kind of go rogue, and they take Fort Ticonderoga. It's in upstate New York, kind of on a border of Canada and New York, and it's a key trade route, okay, for the former French Canadians, now British Canadians, that need to get goods up and down and move armies up and down. And it's one of those old-fashioned star forts that you see down here. Every one of these black spots is a cannon. So there's all kinds of cannons. Okay, the river's over here. That's why the cannons are facing the river. There's interior cannons. There's a training yard. This is a big, modern fort for the time period. And a group of backwoodsmen, mountain boys, the Green Mountain Boys, and a small army led by Benedict Arnold, who's going to be a hero and then a traitor during the war, go and take the fort. And the fort's important because of the trade route, but more importantly, those cannons. See, when the war began, America had exactly 0 cannons, and you can't win a war without cannons. You can't shoot a ship. You can't take down a wall. You can't take down a fort without cannons, and we had none. Great Britain had tons of them. Ships were lined with them. All their forts had them. They could bring over more from England. We were doomed without cannons. When we take Fort Ticonderoga, we strip those cannons out of there and we send them down to Boston. We send them to where the war is going to be. And that's going to be a lifesaver for us. So ironically, we take the fort, we strip the fort. It's going to be very easy to take back. We leave kind of this really small force there. And very quickly into the war, a couple years later, the British are going to take it back. They didn't take it earlier because it really wasn't of strategic importance compared to like Boston and New York and Philadelphia. So they leave it alone, but they do eventually come back and take it, and almost without firing a shot because we took all the defenses out. But those cannons are going to come back to haunt the British. So also during 1775, we have our first, real army battle. Okay, the Battle of Lexington and Concord was militia. So we're going to have an actual United States Army. It's the Battle of Bunker Hill. Famously, the American general said, "Don't fire until you see the whites of their eyes." His name is William Prescott. And that's because the Americans didn't have any ammunition. So they had to wait for the soldiers to get right up on them before they used what little ammunition they had. So it's a very famous battle. It's the first one. It's not really a win, but it's kind of a win. We'll talk about why. So what's happening is the British decide they're going to put some cannons up on a hill. You want the high ground. High ground's huge. So they start putting cannons on a hill. While they're doing that, the Americans fortify a nearby hill. They don't have cannons, so they start building like these earthen walls. They dig up walls from the ground and stack them up. Like when you're a kid and you make igloo battles and have snowball battles. They build up these earthen walls. Then they start firing at the soldiers on the other hill, setting up the cannons. Well, the regular British Army comes up to protect those soldiers, and they get in their big square formation, I told you about that. They get in those big lines. They got the drummers and the fifemen behind them, and they're marching up the hill in formation. Well, meanwhile, the American soldiers are up here just shooting down at them. And the British surprise, they're incredibly surprised. We don't run away. We're supposed to run away. This is the best army in the world. These are a bunch of hicks on the American side. We don't even have uniforms yet, and we're outnumbered. But we don't run away. We defend the hill, and we repel them, and they back off. And this is embarrassing for the British. So they regather. They charge up the hill again in square formation in bright red uniforms with the drums playing. They charge up that hill, and again, we don't run away. We repel them, and we inflict heavy casualties, and they back off down the hill. The third time, remember, the British cannot lose this. It's very embarrassing. Okay? The third time they come uphill, we wait till we can see the whites of their eyes. We fire when they're right next to us, and we run out of ammunition, so we have to run away. And rather than get captured, we take off, and they take the hill. So the British win the battle. They take the hill. They now own the high ground over Boston. But this was incredibly embarrassing for them that they couldn't defeat us on the first run. They lost a ton of men to an army that's not supposed to be capable of doing this. So this was an incredible blow to their ego. This was showing them that we're not going to give up easily, and this is going to be a long fight for them. But they did take the hill. Okay, so then after that, after the Battle of Bunker Hill, the cannons show up. Those cannons from Ticonderoga, they spent all winter moving those through terrible terrain. And the British realize, A, we're not going to put this rebellion down quickly, and B, we can't hold Boston. Washington takes the cannons, puts them in a place called Dorchester Heights, which overlooks Boston Harbor, where the ships are. And don't forget, ships can't fire upwards, or just a little bit upwards, because they can't tilt the ship back. So as soon as we got those ships as soon as we got the cannons above the ships, the British run. They take their ships, they run away, and we free Boston. And Boston becomes the center of the American Revolution because we can train armies there. The Sons of Liberty and the Congress all run to Boston. And they start running the war from there. We hold on to Boston for the rest of the war. And it's because of those cannons from Fort Ticonderoga, and it's because of the army that fought on Bunker Hill and lost the hill that the British realize we can't hold on to Boston, which ends the Intolerable Acts. They can't close the port. They can't punish Boston anymore. The Intolerable Acts are over. We have a foot to stand on, and we have Washington. He can start training his army, and he can start fighting in the Revolutionary War. Okay, that's where we're going to end the chapter. Let's talk about what you do from here. In my classwork tab for your class, this is 7th hour, but whatever class you're in, you're going to find the notes to take with this video, and you're going to find the review sheet. You guys have filled out a bunch of review sheets for me before. For the next 3 days, we're just doing these notes, and we're working on the review sheet. Okay, so I couldn't send you a copy of the review sheet. Just open it, make a copy for yourself, okay, or just keep it open and write the answers using your notes on a separate sheet of paper. Okay, if you can get the review sheet done, you're caught up with class. Okay, we'll talk about the test next week. I'm not really sure how I'm going to do that with you guys, but if you can get your notes done, you can get your review sheet done, and you can study that review sheet, you're good through Friday this week. Okay, please, please, please email me if you have any questions whatsoever. Have a great day. Sure, thanks.